Alright, this is We the People News. I'm not an attorney and not going to give legal advice. However, I will give my opinion on this. My opinion only. Do not take legal advice. Okay? Mainly because I'm not an attorney. That's why, people. Alright? So, if you can't handle the matters on your own, then go ahead and try to find you a competent attorney, which is almost non-existent, by the way. Never look straight forward, always look around to be able to protect yourself by any means necessary. So, in essence, this video is going to be about administrative law, okay? And this is where I believe that we're losing a lot of our rights, okay? Somehow or another, administrative act is supposed to be for corporations, and they put us in the middle of all this crap, okay? And tell you why, but that would take a longer video, right? But let's learn a couple little things.
Remember the fight over net neutrality? Activists and corporations battled over the structure of the internet. Both sides tried to convince the government that their way was right. But who were they trying to convince? Was it the president, Congress, the Supreme Court? None of the above. People were trying to convince the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. The FCC is one of these things called federal agencies, and the laws around them are called administrative law. So there isn't a perfect definition for an agency that's consistent for all things called agencies. But roughly, agencies are the parts of the government that aren't Congress, the courts, the president, or the military during wartime. Imagine that one of those things either...
Rewind that and re-listen to that. That is a very important issue right there. The reason why we're losing our rights. That right there.
Congress or the president decide to do something, like building roads. Well, they're not going to pick up shovels in the concrete themselves. They're also not going to hire and oversee the workers themselves. Instead, they'll create an agency to carry out their goal. Agencies are most of the things in the government whose name is a jumble of letters, like the NSA, the FBI, the EPA, NASA, FTC, ATF, DOJ, DOE.
Alright, so read all these things right here. Okay. Now, to understand the Constitution value and the loss of the Constitution, right? All these things, Congress made. Alright? Now, what Congress did was give the authority to the president, which, in constitutionally speaking, the president does not have that authority at all. What happened was Congress did not want to be held responsible for his own actions. They wanted to stay lifetime appointment, basically, as long as they can in Congress. The president itself was only 4 to 8 years. So they could pass the buck to the president because he was not guaranteed to be in there for a long period of time, right? So Congress did this to give it to the president to escape accountabilities of their own action. So think about that, y'all. And this could have been happening, right? In order for the president to be in control of all this, had to be martial law. That's the only two ways this happens. So you guys have to decide how the president actually ends up authority with all this. See, these right here, and I'll call him out. If Donald Trump truly was a very good president, he would have went in there and used a pen and just signed a piece of paper and would have got rid of half all these people instantly. There was no argue, no dispute, no nothing. All he has to do is sign an executive order and dismantle that. It would have took him 5 minutes. If that long. Okay? So that's all the president even has to do over something that he doesn't even have authority over. Unless the two things was there. Number one, Congress waived their rights gave it to the president, made him responsible for these things, which Congress had no authority to do, by the way, and or martial law is still in effect from the Civil War and World War One, since it's never been ended. Now, when you talk about people saying that we're still in martial law, this right here is one of the side effects of the martial law part of it. So that is the only two ways that president actually has that authority. Other than that, he does not have it. So there you go.
Etc. Agencies are formed by an act of Congress. Congress writes a kind of law called an organic statute that lays out the purpose and the structure of the agency. And then the agency is in charge of implementing that purpose as it's laid out in the statute. I like to think of federal agencies like giant robots. So Congress needs to deal with a specific subject matter, but that issue's kind of varied. They don't want to get into all the specifics themselves, but it needs to be dealt with. So they build a giant robot to deal with it. And while they're building it, they need to give it a structure that corresponds to its goals. An agency's structure might be designed to deal with investigating federal crimes, like the FBI, or maybe with promulgating standards for science and industry, like NIST. These different goals need different organizations to achieve them efficiently. A major part of this structure is the cockpit. Just like some giant robots have only one pilot, and some have multiple, different agencies are headed up by different arrangements of officers. These positions are appointed by the president. Department of Homeland Security has one officer in charge of the whole agency, who reports directly to the president. The FCC has multiple commissioners, who all have slightly more independence. Officers in charge of certain very important agencies make up the president's cabinet. Also, while some agencies are totally independent, other agencies can actually be subsumed into one.
So think about that, right? Why there is certain industries totally independent, okay? They still have basically what they call the rule of law over you. Rule of law, not constitution law, but the rule of law over you. Okay? Like your Social Security, the IRS. Okay? That's an administrative agency with administrative judge. It's a separate court away from the courts for corporations that they bring you into because they think, they're assumed and presumed that you are some type of corporation, y'all. That's the reason why paying federal taxes is supposed to be volunteering. There is no law saying you have to pay. However, with the threat of force backing them up, then you're scared to death and you pay taxes under threat and duress. And then you go to these courts and they act like you are part of the corporation and you get charged.
Giant super agency. The organic statutes also give agencies a subject matter specific focus, like environmental protection or alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. Some agencies are purely internal and advisory, like the Office of Management and Budget, but most focus on some specific subject matter in society, like housing or trade. The language of these purpose statements aren't super specific because they need to deal with varied circumstances. Remember, the whole point is that
they're not super specific because it releases them from accountability. Remember, we're going to have to play word magic with these people, right? This guy may fully understand what he's saying. However, anything that's not specific is gapped open to interpretations means where they will not be accountable of causing you harm, people. That's the reason why it's so hard to fight against the government. It's because all these things right here and making everything so vague that they can do whatever they want to do to you and win because you have no money to fight them back. And they don't even have a constitutional right to do these things.
Congress doesn't want to do the specifics themselves. So just like a pilot is
Yeah, Congress don't want to do it themselves, right? They do not want to be responsible for any accountability.
responsible for implementing a more general mission plan, the agency's leaders are responsible for implementing a more general statute. This is why agencies are called semi-independent executive bodies. They get independence, but only within the scope of the organic statute. The agency's two biggest tools.
Now, understand statutes, right? So if you go to fight the EPA and you go to the Supreme Courts, right? The Supreme Court's actually going to look at all the statutes, not the Constitution. So if EPA comes to your house and says that your pond is broken, some type of deal, and they're going to charge you $30,000 per day and all that kind of stuff, that's due to the EPA statutes. Well, then they go, you fight it to the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court says, well, they operated in their statutes. Even though it's against your constitutional rights, the Supreme Court's going to back up the EPA because he operated in their statutes. And since everything's so vague and not direct, and they've got a broad variety of things they can do against you, well, it's in the statutes, they can do it. So the Supreme Court says, well, no, EPA didn't do nothing wrong. So there's no remedy for we the people. Well, what about our Constitution? Well, that has nothing to do with it. You have no constitutional rights in this. It's by statutes. Statutes, codes, and regulations. It is not constitutional. It's a privilege. So they put you under a privilege and not a constitution and not rights.
For implementing their statutes are rulemaking and adjudication. Agencies can make rules within their subject matter that have the force of law. They can
sit and think about that, y'all. In their statutes, they can make rules that has the force of law, even though it's against your constitutional rights. And you think Congress is going to be responsible for that? You think these people in the agencies are going to be responsible? No, because they got broad variety of things they can play against you. They've gotten really out of control. The whole purpose of all this anyway is for businesses. This was not supposed to be intended for the people. This was not supposed to be for your personal property. This was not supposed to be attended to your house. All these things were supposed to be statutes, codes, rules, and regulations against themselves, against the agencies to stay within the guidelines. But it was not supposed to be passed to us because we're supposed to have constitutional rights. But because of the ignorance of the people, we just kept falling into it. We just kept saying, well, they're allowed to do this, they're allowed to do this, they're allowed to do this. And now they've gotten so out of control due to our ignorance. Even the Bible says, my people will fall of lack of knowledge. I'm just saying. And even wise people say, well, the United States is going to fall within of lack of knowledge. Our founding fathers, we gave you the tools you need. But you had to fight to keep your rights. The only way you're not going to keep your rights is if you lack of knowledge.
Also investigate, prosecute, and judge rule breakers. So we have these giant robots with legal power and independence. We've created a monster. Well, there are several mechanisms for control.
Yeah, we created a monster, y'all.
Controlling the agencies. First, Congress gets to shape the agency from the beginning. The agency is dependent on Congress for money and power and a purpose. Congress can call the agency head in front of a congressional committee and hammer them with questions. They can cut off funding for the agency if they want to, which will effectively disable it. Also, the president gets to put the pilot in the robot. They get to choose who's steering the agency. The president also gets to order the agencies around. These are called executive orders, and they're supposed to make sure that the agency is acting in accord with the will of the people. So besides these structural...
I'm sorry. That gets my goat. That's just too funny. Oh, my goodness. The president is not going to waste that much time even deciphering if they're supposed to be operating in quarter. And he's supposed to be too busy doing other things, overseas matters. He don't have time to babysit these people that Congress is supposed to be responsible for. That's not supposed to be left up for the president. Again, Congress decided to give this power to the president because he was limited into his voting capacity. This was a lifetime appointment planned out for Congress to escape responsibility. Fucking assholes.
Controls. The Administrative Procedure Act is the law's biggest source of control over the agencies. Congress passed this law, the Administrative Procedure Act, or the APA, in 1946. The APA controls the agency's tools of rulemaking and adjudication. Agency rulemaking is how the agencies take the general mandate of their organic statute and turn it into specific rules. For example, the Food and Drug Administration makes...
Remember, y'all, rules that's got forced like if it's law. But how did a rule become a law? And how could it be forced if it's not a law? It's just a rule. Sit and think about that. People going to jail, prison, and fined for breaking rules that's not even law.
Specific rules about the purity and
No innocent people going to prison? Bullshit.
manufacture of food and drugs. The Highway Safety Administration makes specific rules about the road. The APA says that most rules made by an agency must be open to notice and comment. This means that a notice of the proposed rule is printed up in the giant federal list of proposed rules, and the agency has to accept comments about the rule from all interested parties. The APA also says that the agency must respond to any comments that are substantial. Agencies also adjudicate claims of rule violations. For this purpose,
This right here, I dare to say, because I was not in courts with them, however, it was public TV, and the judge says you had no constitutional rights to the Bundys. This is the reason why it was such a hard case for the Bundys to win. And especially when the judge says there's no constitutional rights, because there's an administrative court. Okay? It was a business court.
the APA created the position of the Administrative Law Judge, or the ALJ. In general, ALJs have two primary duties in the administrative adjudication process. First, they oversee procedural things like depositions and witnesses, and they also determine the facts of the case. Then they make an initial judgment of the law and judge whether or not someone has broken the agency's rules. So ALJ...
Whether they've broken the agency rules. So I don't clean my pond up. I've broken the agency's rules that I have no contract with. I'm not obligated to go by the rules. And yet, somehow or another, they seem to think that we are obligated to them and waive our constitutional rights.
ALJs act very much like a trial judge at a court, except they're constrained to a much smaller jurisdiction. The vast majority of ALJs work for Social Security, determining disability and dependency questions. Well, what happens if people...
I venture to say that's not... it's IRS. Because IRS is involved in the same process here. This is the reason why it's so hard to get remedy from them, right? It's under the same guides. It's a private corporation, people. And because you did not obey by their rules, they have a force rule that acts like a law against you. Slavery.
People think that an agency's rule is bad or illegal or even unconstitutional. The APA attempts to balance the government's need to control the agency with the agency's role as the executor of the law. Usually the courts defer to the agency when it's interpreting its organic statute, aka when the robot is interpreting its mission.
There you go. The courts interpret it by their statutes. By their statutes, people. Not by the Constitution, but by their statutes.
The courts are much more demanding when the agency is making claims about facts and reasoning. So, in conclusion, agencies are created by a congressional statute which gives the agency a structure and a purpose, and then the agency is given broad authority to interpret that purpose.
Broad authority, right? To escape accountability.
The agency is...
Which goes back into the other issue. I just had a video just a few minutes ago, right? CPS, the Title 4D program is in this type of deal. All right, it's in contract. You broke one of the rules in the 4D program. Child divorces or CPS cases. It's all under this. This is the reason why they say you have no constitutional rights.
Piloted by one or more people who is chosen by the president, and the whole agency is checked and constrained by the Administrative Procedure Act.
Anyway, that's my opinion, y'all. Take it what it is. Okay? He did a very good job. I just stretched it out a little further, my opinion, and the reason why we're losing our constitutional rights. This is We the People News. Bye, y'all.